want to say thank you so much for being here and lending us your time and expertise. Well, I want to say once again, thank you so much for coming on. Hello,
Sure.
everyone, and welcome to the Chief Science Officer Zoom In on STEAM call, which we learn about different STEM careers and their effect on everyday life. I'm personally excited to host this call. Once again, as I mentioned earlier, because of all of its impacts in our day-to-day lives. Today, I have the honor and the pleasure of introducing Dr. Clemenson. And Dr. Clemenson, can you tell our participants a little bit about yourself and your work?
Okay, so this is kind of just a little bit about myself. I was actually born in Texas, but I was kind of raised in the Bay Area in Palo Alto. It's probably best known for Stanford University, but I didn't live too far away from there. I've kind of stayed in California a lot for my career, and I've always kind of liked to hug by the ocean. I like being near the ocean. So I did my undergraduate work at UC Santa Barbara, and then I did my grad work at UC San Diego, and now I'm currently at UC Irvine. And I've kind of done a lot of different aspects of biology, but in grad school, I really kind of focused on neuroscience. So that's kind of what I do now. I do neuroscience. I look at humans. I look at how memory works in humans, and I focus a lot on spatial memory, so kind of understanding how we learn about our environment and how we kind of map our environment. That's kind of my main focus. Do you want me to just kind of jump into it? Is that kind of the best way to do it? Okay, so I talked a little bit before, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. Let me tell you first just about the brain region that we study. We study an area of the brain called the hippocampus, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of you actually know what the hippocampus is or have heard about it before. It's essentially our memory center, right? So when people talk about things like Alzheimer's or disease, or as you get older, your memory kind of goes, they're really kind of referring to the hippocampus. So you have two hippocampi. There's one, they're kind of in the medial temporal lobe. So if you were to go behind your ear and like peel away the cortex, you'd have two hippocampi like this. If you roll it out, it actually looks like a seahorse. And so hippocampus is actually Greek for seahorse. So whoever first dissected it out decided that's what we're going to name it. It's a very beautiful structure. There's tons and tons and tons of neurons in there, and they're highly organized. It's a very organized structure, right? Because if obviously you need all these neurons to kind of encode all the memories that you have, right? And they have to be organized, right? Because you have to be able to retrieve these memories when you want to, right? So it's a very kind of cool structure to study. So it's generally kind of involved in memory, and there's all sorts of different types of memory. So for example, learning how to ride a bike, right? You probably never forget how to ride a bike. And so that's kind of a form of muscle memory or procedural memory. But what the hippocampus is really responsible for is something we call autobiographical memory. So these are typically what you think of when you think of memory, right? So if you are trying to recall a vacation that you had, or a birthday party that you had, or that time at a friend's house, right? These are personal memories that about things that have actually happened to you. And when you think about, if you were to describe one of these memories to a friend or something, you could kind of very generally describe it in these four terms: who was there, what happened, when it happened, and where it happened. And this where part is really what I focus on. Spatial memory is kind of really interesting to me because it's, back in the day when we didn't have phones and we didn't have our phones to kind of lead us places, we had to learn how to get places. We had to read maps, and we had to kind of just experience things. And, a lot of animals have a hippocampus because they don't have phones to tell them where to go, right? And so at one point, navigating around our environment, learning and remembering where things are, where to get food, where to get shelter, and things like that, those are critical to our survival, right? If you weren't able to do those things, if you got lost, it could have pretty severe consequences. So being able to learn about our surroundings and build this kind of cognitive mental map that we have in our head was extremely important. And these cognitive maps are actually held in the hippocampus. So if you did not have a hippocampus, and there are people out there who do not have a hippocampus for one reason or another, they've had it removed or there's been some damage, they are unable to form any new maps and even any new memories, right? So they have a type of amnesia. And the way that we create these maps of space is through experience, through exploration, right? So I'm sure that any of you now, if I asked you to bring out a piece of paper and draw me, kind of the outline, a map of your house, right? You could probably tell me where all the kitchen is, all the bathrooms are. You could even label individual pieces of furniture and stuff like that because you've experienced it, right? Because you've walked around your house enough to kind of be able to create up this mental map. I'm sure you could even do it in the dark. If you turn off all the lights at night, you could probably find your way to the kitchen to get a drink of water or maybe to the bathroom or something without turning anything on. It's because we have a very sophisticated mapping system in our brain, and that's because of the hippocampus. So what I'm going to tell you today is actually that we use our hippocampus to create cognitive maps of even virtual space. And I'm talking specifically about video games. Modern video games, a lot of times they revolve around huge open world environments, right? Things like Minecraft or Grand Theft Auto, right? Grand Theft Auto is actually based off cities in the real life. Could be racing games or things like that. But the point is, in order to be good at these video games, in order to be successful, in order to complete these video games, you really have to have a good spatial awareness, right? You have to know where you are within the game. You have to know where mission objectives are. You have to know where to go. You don't want to forget, where enemies are coming from. And so we need to have an intact hippocampus so that we can kind of create these mental maps of even virtual space. And so what I've actually been working on is actually how we can exercise our hippocampus by letting people play these huge video games, right? And so the video game that we've been using is actually Minecraft. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. If you're not familiar with Minecraft, it's essentially like virtual Legos. So it's a game where the entire world's just built on blocks and it's procedurally generated. And what that means is that there's essentially no end. So if you keep on walking in one direction, the computer will just constantly generate more and more space and environments, things like that. So this game is really all about exploring. And so that's why we thought it was a good game to kind of look at how our hippocampus is working, how we kind of generate these cognitive maps, and whether or not we can exercise our hippocampus by doing it. So we set up these servers. We set up lots and lots of servers for individuals to come on and play. So everybody plays on their own individual server. And we essentially just track everything that they do, right? We look at every single block that they remove, every single block that they take, everything that they build. And we also we look at where they go, right? So this is actually a computer generated of where one person has explored. And each of the different colors actually represents where they went on that day. So on one day, they play 30 to 45 minutes. And so you can see, on this dark blue day, they kind of explored some of the mountain regions. A lot of the days are kind of clustered around this one area in the center. And it's probably because that's where they built their house, right? That's probably where they spent the most time. But the cool thing is that we're able to kind of track and actually visualize how people explore their own environment and what they're actually doing. And we can actually quantify that. So this is just a graph of one person's kind of exploration pattern. There's an X, a Y, and a Z axis. It's basically this is a view is from a top-down perspective. So where are they kind of going within the space? If you look at the numbers on the axes, those are actually in meters, sorry. So these people are exploring upwards of 1 square kilometer total. So they're kind of exploring quite a bit, right? And what I'd like you to kind of just get out of this is that people explore differently, right? So if you give everybody the exact same environment and exact same kind of starting settings, everybody explores their environment differently, and that's kind of the really cool thing about this study is that we can kind of explore how people are different and how people explore their own worlds. Because that's probably the most interesting thing about humans, right? Because we're all different. And it's very cool to kind of see that diversity in how people explore. So kind of the main point of this particular study that I just want to get to is that what we found is that it does seem like we are exercising the hippocampus by exploring. So we found that the more that people explore their space, the better they do in certain types of memory tests and things like that. So that's kind of the main point of it. If you're curious about how we actually quantify how people explore, what we do is we're applying a mathematical kind of equation to these people's exploration. And basically what we're looking at is how predictable somebody's movements are. So let's say, for example, that you have one person who's building a house and it's only out of wood, and that's what they did the entire time. They went to their house, they built their house, they collected wood and built their house and collected wood and built their house and collected wood. So they really only went to 2 different places, right? So what we look at is how predictable somebody's movements are. So someone who is just going between a house and the wood over and over and over again, they have very predictable movements. At any given time, they're probably either at the wood or they're at the house. Somebody who is unpredictable means that they are kind of going all over the place, and we really can't pinpoint where they're actually going at any given time. So that would be an example of somebody with high exploration, and the person kind of going back and forth between their house and the wood is kind of an example of low exploration. So that's how we kind of quantify that. The last thing I kind of wanted to talk about is that the other thing that we looked at, which I'm not going to get to, this is something that we're currently kind of studying, is actually looking at building, what people build, right? So we're interested in kind of creativity. So if I give everybody a chest full of the same materials, what do people create? And you can see already that these people all have the exact same starting materials and points, and they all create something different, right? And so can we use a game like Minecraft, a platform like Minecraft, to actually look at creativity and start to kind of look at questions about that? So maybe that'll be for another talk when we actually get that up and running. But I will say the last thing is that I work in a neuroimaging lab, so we actually look at the brain in real time. We have a giant magnet, and we're kind of looking at different structures of the brain and how the brain is actually functioning. And we're actually having people play Minecraft inside of the scanner, so we can actually look and see what types of brain regions are actually active when people are playing Minecraft and things like that. So yeah, that was kind of what I wanted to say about the Minecraft study. Are there any questions? Or I also have a slide about myself, but maybe we can do some questions first.
Yeah, sure. Well, I want to say thank you so much for presenting your remarkable research. It's evident that you are so knowledgeable in this field and that there are sorts of different implications of this research. Feel free to share that slide about yourself if you'd like. That way students can grab questions off of it. But if you'd like to do questions first, that's perfectly fine too.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, so I was just kind of asked to make a slide about myself. I've actually had to do this once before, and I didn't know what to say about myself. And so in the very center, you'll see, oops, let's try that one more time. This was a text message from my wife, and she told me to include, I'm an avid Warriors fan, collaborative spirit, Fortnite winner, proud owner of a 90s Miata, fan of B horror films, professional reader of at least 3 books, green thumb, master of cursive, more torso than legs, able to quote Willow on command, and Padawan for life. I mean, there's a lot of sarcasm in that particular one, but I thought it was kind of a fun way to kind of sum things up. These are some, on the top row, that's kind of some of the places that I've studied. On the left is UC Santa Barbara. The Salk Institute is kind of where I did a lot of my graduate research. I have some brain pictures because I like looking at the brain. I love going to national parks. I love to hike. The tree one is Sequoia National Forest. If you guys ever get a chance to come out to California, you should see Sequoia. It's pretty incredible. Some of the oldest and largest living things in the entire world. Joshua Tree, another beautiful place. I love to surf. That's why I always kind of hang out by the ocean. I played in a competitive dodgeball league for a while. And I do some rock climbing. So that's kind of about myself. And if you have any questions, yeah, I'd love to kind of answer them for you.
I've been to those national parks, and I can second that. They're absolutely gorgeous, phenomenal places. I think there's something about looking at a tree that's like 3 times like there's masses, you know, like they're bigger than small. But
I think they are the largest by weight and oldest living things on Earth, period. Yeah, so they're pretty amazing.
Our first question here is from Miss Kelly. She says, during your research project, how many individuals did you track?
In that particular project, we probably did something upwards of 80 people. So yeah, quite a few people. I mean, we always want to get as many people as we can. And fortunately for us, it's not too difficult to get people to play video games. And so it wasn't too hard. and we paid them to play video games. So
wow,
it wasn't that bad. Yeah.
That's like a good deal.
Yeah. CSO Torin said we should get a server for CSOs to play. I don't know much about video games, but he mentioned a lot of things in the chat about how to do that. So
I'm sure that somebody here knows how to make a server. It's not incredibly difficult, but yeah.
Oh, look at Mahar and Kenya raising his hand.
Yeah.
All right, well, make it happen. New action plan.
There you go. What's the most remarkable or some of the most poignant discoveries you found during your research? Like something that really made you like go look back and say, wow, I can't believe that's something you found.
You know, I do think the video game thing is pretty novel. So The way that I got interested in video games was, so I've been all over the place as far as biology goes. I worked in a plant lab. I did everything from cell culture, so growing cells on a dish, to doing animal studies, to doing human studies. And I think one of the most profound kind of, scientific discoveries that always interested me was something called environmental enrichment. And basically what this was is that if you take an animal and you put it in a larger cage with more toys and things to do and all sorts of things, there are some amazing things that happen to this animal's brain. The brain gets bigger, the brain has more neurons, those neurons make more connections. And I think the most amazing thing about that was that you don't have to actually do anything. You're not giving a drug treatment, you're not kind of doing anything. By simply changing an animal's environment, you could have this really profound effect on the brain. And what really motivated me to study humans was I wanted to know if we could apply that to humans. And so people have done a lot of work. And when people talk about the environment of humans, we often talk about things like diet and sleep and exercise, and which are all very, very important. But I think one thing that we have to understand is that in this day and age, technology is just as much a part of our environment as all those other things, as eating and sleeping and breathing, right? Everybody here obviously plays more on their phone than goes exercising. That's just, that's just guaranteed, right? We use it daily, we use it regularly. And that is just something that we can't study in animals, right? Because they don't have phones, they don't have these things. So I'm really interested in understanding how technology can have an impact on our brain. And so that's kind of where my focus is going. Video games was kind of my way in, and now I kind of want to go a little bit further into that too.
That's fascinating. Another question we have is, what advice would you give to your 14-year-old self?
Yeah, that's a great one. I would say take your time. There's no rush. I did a lot of different things. I think in undergraduate, I had a really difficult time trying to figure out what I want to do because I had so many interests. So I dabbled a little bit in engineering, and I got, a little bit into math and a little bit into, business and things like that. And so I really had a tough time trying to figure out what I want to do. And it wasn't until after undergraduate where I got a full-time job in a lab that I really started trying to figure out, kind of narrow down some of these things. So I think my first piece of advice was you have plenty of time, take your time, try different things, experience different things, and see what you like. The next thing is that don't feel like you need to fit yourself into some sort of mold of what a neuroscientist is or what a scientist is or what an engineer is. Nowadays, people are very into interdisciplinary work, right? So they want people who can cross fields, who can span different areas of research and things like that. And I think that's a very positive thing. So, I would kind of keep those two things in mind. Don't worry, you have plenty of time, try different things and see what you like. And it's a good thing to be diverse and to try lots of things too.
Absolutely. Who was your mentor as a child?
I can't really say one particular person because I feel like I had so many influences, along with kind of family members. I've met a lot of really interesting people in all of my science kind of fields that I've done. And I would say each of them had just as much of an impact as the other. I've had a lot of really great mentors in graduate school. I've had the opportunity to meet some very famous people who have now passed away, but the Salk Institute is was a big science area. Jonas Salk, invented the vaccine for polio. But I had a chance to meet, some people who made DNA and so some really interesting scientists. It's hard for me to just say one because I really did learn a lot from everybody.
Absolutely. Another question we had was, have you found Alzheimer's is connected to the hippocampus in terms of memory?
Yeah. The hippocampus is actually one of the first areas that starts to degrade with Alzheimer's, right? Because it is kind of the memory center, right? And memory is kind of the first thing to go. So they are very tightly linked with each other. The other thing is actually they are starting to figure out that spatial memory might be very sensitive to aging or to Alzheimer's, sorry. So how people perform on specific tests of spatial memory actually seems to be a predictor of whether or not people will get Alzheimer's and stuff like that. It's pretty early in the research, but they do think it's tightly linked. Yes, but Alzheimer's is very closely linked to problems with your hippocampus.
I see. And that was from Lisa Smith from CSO Armando. Sorry if I butchered your name. We have, what was one of the most interesting patterns you saw?
Patterns in terms of exploring?
I'm not sure quite what the CSO meant in that, but if they want to clarify, otherwise it sounds like, yes, that's what.
Yeah, we didn't, we weren't too strict about what people were actually doing. And the problem is, it's a little bit tough. The reason in an experiment like this, you really need a lot of people to look at because people are so different. We actually had multiple different groups. So we had groups that focused just on building and groups that focused on exploring. And we tried to push them into these directions, right? So the explorers, we tried to entice them to explore. We played a little scavenger hunt to try and get them out there and to try and look for new things. The problem is some people who were in the exploring group just wanted to build, right? So you can't really stop them. So it's really interesting to see this diversity. And I'd be interested to kind of go into, what makes a person who wants to, what makes a person want to be a builder versus somebody who wants to be an explorer. But as far as specific patterns of how people navigated, we didn't really, it kind of depended on their motivation. So if they wanted to build a lot and they were building a big house, they probably were in the woods collecting a lot of, wood. If they wanted to go mining, they were probably in the caves and just like looking for gold and diamonds and stuff like that. So.
Very interesting. Another question we had from Ms. Claire is, have you studied the elderly? I've been noticing that my mother-in-law's memory seems to be fading since the shelter in place, and I've wondered if it's because she's limited to her apartment. Do you think that's possible? Yeah,
I think that's a great question. So we have run this experiment. We've run one Minecraft experiment in what we would call middle-aged individuals, and then we've also worked a lot with Super Mario 3D World, which is another three-dimensional game, and we've actually done that in 60 to 80-year-olds, so much older individuals, and we see the same improvements. I should say that I'm interested in video games because I happen to like video games, and I think it's a kind of a fun way to kind of test these types of things, but it's not just video games. When it comes to the elderly, it's about exercise and diet and keeping kind of like mentally engaged. And video games can definitely do that. It can keep people cognitively stimulated, but there are other ways to do that too. Learning a new musical instrument. I would say traveling places is a great way to do it. But yeah, this shelter in place is a little bit tough. I do think that there's a place for video games. I think that can help keep people engaged. It is nice because it does give them a world to explore. So there are aspects of video games that you can actually, that can actually exercise areas of the brain. So I would say that's kind of a good thing. But we have tried it in older individuals and it does seem to work. Again, we are actually putting people inside of a scanner to look and see if we can see any changes in the brain. But at least from a behavioral standpoint, we do see improvements in memory.
That's fascinating. And I can only imagine the implications for all these different people in that age group that suffer from those conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another question we have is from Miss Lisa Smith. Do you hope this study might help with Alzheimer's prevention?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny, I just gave kind of a little talk on Alzheimer's. There is no cure for Alzheimer's. It's a tough disease, right? It's progressive. And once the symptoms actually start to show, it kind of goes downhill from there. It's a rough one. But you're right in that it is about prevention. It's trying to prevent it or kind of prolong some of those symptoms from actually happening. So the best way to kind of combat Alzheimer's might be to try and intervene at earlier time points, right? During middle ages and stuff like that. I do think that this is a way to do it. I do think that this is one possible way, but I don't think there's any one solution, right? I do think it's about getting out there and exercising, and even social interactions has been shown to be important, right? Depression can kind of lead you down a bad route, which is not good for Alzheimer's either. So getting out there, seeing friends, interacting, traveling, like staying mentally active, staying healthy, it's kind of a combination of everything. I do think video games has its place, but I don't think it's there. I don't think it should replace all those other great things that we know are kind of good for you.
Absolutely. Another question we have is from Apologies in advance if I don't get your name quite right. So Viva Kraj, and he says, "Hey, Mr. Dane, my question is, who is your role model, and what way did she impact you?"
Oh man. I would say my current, or I guess during my postdoc, I had an advisor, and he was great. He really kind of allowed me to kind of freely explore my interests, right? It's hard to go to any sort of like professor and say, "Hey, I want to study video games. I have this great idea. You'll never believe me." And he kind of took that chance with me. And I think, I think just his openness and his willingness to kind of, see that kind of through really had a big impact on me, and really kind of has allowed me to kind of, kind of pursue this kind of field of research that may not be so traditional, but, there actually probably is something there. So I would say his name is Craig Stark.
Craig Stark. Yeah, another question we had was from CSO Shibeni. Again, apologies if I don't get your name right. How long would you advise us to play video games in one day?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So all of our studies we probably have people play between 30 minutes to 60 minutes, depending on how interested they are. So I don't think it takes a lot. So we can see improvements, even in young people, we see improvements after 2 weeks. We haven't really done a strict timeline. In the older individuals, in the 70, 80-year-olds, we've had them play for 1 month, same thing, 30 minutes to an hour. Yeah, that's a tough question. 30 minutes to an hour seems to be okay, and it seems to be long enough for us to see an impact. I don't think there's a problem with playing longer, but I would say again, like, you don't want to play to a point where you're neglecting your own health and sleep and exercise and social interactions and stuff like that. So, there is kind of a limit to how much I think you should play, but 30 minutes to 60 minutes is what we have our participants play.
Interesting. And Miss Kelly asks, for the older crowd, logging on or turning on the console would take at least 50 minutes. So maybe 90 minutes?
Yeah, 90 minutes would be fine. Well, in the study in the kind of middle-aged individuals, we kind of let them have free reign. We said at least 30 minutes and kind of no more than like an hour and a half, essentially, like that. So, if people are actually really engaged in it, we want them to continue, right? So we don't want to stop them, but, it's kind of hard to find that balance of what people should do.
For sure. And so what impact do you feel like, how does the impact change depending on the age range? So for instance, exercising your hippocampus is incredibly important, and it seems like your research has shown a correlation between video games and that exercise, but compared to someone who, for instance, is 18 versus 80,
yeah, that's a great question. The difference, we actually see a very similar improvement in memory. The difference actually seems to be how long it lasts. In the older individuals, we see a much more lasting effect. So let's say they play for 1 month, and then we stop for 1 month, and then we test them 2 months. So after 1 month of playing, we actually still see an increase in that improvement. So in the older individuals, it does seem to last. In the younger individuals, in the 18 to 21-year-olds, it drops off immediately. But that could easily be a product of in the older individuals, this is often the very first time they've ever played a game, period, right? And so it's not just about the game, but it's the experience of like being in a study. It's an experience of like playing with a console, period. So anything kind of on a console. And so it's a much more enriching experience for the older individuals. Whereas if I were to give you guys a new game, I mean, you might be excited, but you have a lot of stuff going on in your life, right? You're active, you got friends to see, you probably have other games that you want to play and things like that. So it's different. I think in the younger individuals, they need kind of a little more stimulation. Whereas in the older individuals, this one event is very enriching to them. So that's kind of the biggest difference that we see.
That's so interesting. And I was also wondering, how do you feel that video games compare in comparison to other activities and other ways of learning? Like, for instance, if you were to test, for instance, someone who was playing like an instrument, right? Like learning to play trumpet or flute or clarinet, how do you feel like that would compare? Or do you feel like there's something, there's that exploration piece, right, with video games that really separates it and distinguishes it?
Yeah. I don't think that one is better or worse than the other. Learning is so a lot of activities have been shown to actually have a positive impact on the hippocampus. Physical exercise, diet, sleep, learning things, social interactions, all these things have shown to be positive. And it's really difficult to say if one is better or worse than the other. I think it's really kind of about a combination of everything. So yeah, I don't think you have to play video games to kind of to have any sort of, to exercise your hippocampus, right? I think there's many ways that you can actually do it.
Absolutely. And I was wondering, or pardon me, CSO Viva Krav was wondering, how does playing video games impact your day or life?
I still play video games. I have always played video games, and I've always found a way to kind of make it work. Yeah, it's just something I've always enjoyed. I think as you get older, you just become more responsible about playing video games. So, you find a way to kind of fit it into your time. But, for me personally, it's a great way that I can keep in touch with my brother and friends and things like that. So it's more of a social thing than anything else. So I like to get on and play with friends. And yeah, you're able to kind of keep it up, even if you have a kid, even into adulthood, it's possible to still kind of continue to play video games. You just get better about it and better with your time, I would say.
Definitely. And something that helps, I think, young students like us who are, chief science officers are students from grade 6 to 12, so we're often in that educational pipeline. What was your educational process in terms of, finding the right colleges for your research and then, of course, going postgraduate and pursuing your doctorate? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, undergrad was, I thought there was a big jump from high school to undergrad in a positive way. It was more that there were so many new experiences, and it was very enriching, right? It's a very kind of enriching time of your life. I tried to get as many opportunities as I could to try and work in different labs. So I worked with a plant lab. I worked in an eye lab. We did like eye research. I worked in a lab where we did lizards. Just anything I could do, just because I found everything kind of interesting. So it was tough. But again, like I said, I don't think I really fell into neuroscience until after undergrad. I kind of ended up being a biology major in undergrad, but I didn't really, it wasn't until I joined an actual neuroscience lab that I really kind of started to get interested in neuroscience. So like I said, I think it just takes time, right? Like I know that there are people out there who are, who know exactly what they want, but that just was not me. I was interested in lots of different things. And I thought about maybe going to vet school for a little bit, thought about med school for a little bit. And so I was kind of all over the place. I would say, take your time again, and try a lot of different things. If there's something generally that interests you, when it comes to science and biology, I think that there's lots of opportunities to do different things. I think if you want to do a little bit of, on a day-to-day basis, I do a little bit of computer programming, I design studies, and so I do think that there's a creative aspect to it. So I do have an opportunity to try a lot of different things, I would say, in the field that I am in right now, at least.
And what helped you start paring down and when you're making those decisions about what you actually wanted to pursue? I think as someone who's does a lot and is experiencing a lot, do you think it was just kind of the idea of, well, I'll enjoy any of it, so I might as well choose one? Or what was really instrumental in you making that choice?
And that is tough. The thing that did appeal to me is the experience that I had after undergraduate school, just working in a lab, was very positive in the sense that I realized I could do a lot of different things, right? So there was a little bit of math involved. There was a little bit of computer programming involved. I actually got to run experiments. I got to run behavior. And I think just in general, the thing that interests me about the brain is that every single thing that you do requires your brain, right? Your brain is involved in some way, somehow. And so I think that question of what is your brain doing was really kind of fascinating to me. To some extent, I do think it's a choice. I do think you have to choose because I had so many interests. I feel like I could have seen myself going lots of different ways, but I do think at some point you have to make a choice. I don't have a way for you to do that. I think you just have to kind of try these things. Yeah.
That's wonderful advice. And coming from CSO Christiani, if you play any game for a long period of time, like over playing a particular game, does it affect the brain?
Like for an extended period of time? I mean, we've never tried. I mean, again, like I said, if you're playing to a point where you are starting to neglect other things that we know are good for you, so like sleep, if you're not getting your, 7 to 8 hours of sleep, if you are not eating well, if you are not exercising, then it will affect your health, even if you're playing video games, right? So that's kind of what I would say about that.
Everything in moderation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So from another question from CSO Viva Kraus, what kind of things do you prefer to do at your free time? Playing Fortnite or exploring social media pages, and why?
Um, I prefer to play video games. So I don't do a lot of social media. I think there are some positive things I think about social media, but I think there are a lot of negative things. And so I personally don't um, do a lot of social media. I try and stay in touch with friends as much as I can by calling or by visiting them or kind of seeing them in person. I put a lot of value on like personal interactions, I think, with people. So I try and make that happen as much as I can. There's nothing wrong. Well, there are positive things about social media and connecting with people. But I think there are some negative things on there as well. And yeah, so currently I play either Fortnite or Call of Duty Warzone because that's what my friends play, right? And we get together and we play together. So I would prefer to do that.
Makes sense to me. From CSO Chibeni from Kenya, they ask, just to be specific, is it okay to play for 3 hours but still observe sleep and health?
I mean, again, like I don't want to put a time limit on things of like what you should and should not be doing because we haven't actually tested that. But I would say that's probably fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I will have 3-hour gaming sessions, no problem, and it doesn't affect my sleep and health. So I would say it's probably fine, but I don't want to put a number on anything.
I think CSO Chibeni in Kenya his mom's telling him to get off the computer probably.
Yeah.
Is that what's happening, Chibeni?
Yeah.
So let's stick with 90 minutes so you keep mom happy.
Okay.
So it sounds like Dr. Clemenson is saying, like, you want a balance. Like, you definitely want to have all these other factors in your life that would help contribute to your health. And video games are cool, but make sure that it's in addition to, eating right and sleeping right.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure. So are there any specific recommendations you would make in terms of video games? Like, for instance, someone from the ages of like 16 to 18 should be doing some activities like such as video games for around like 60 minutes, or do you think it really just depends on the individual and how much nourishment they need?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the individual. I think if you're really kind of engaged in it, I think there's nothing wrong with playing a little bit more. The other thing is video games aren't for everyone, right? There are definitely people out there who don't play video games, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Other things, the other thing I think is really good, if you want to exercise your spatial memory, would be traveling, going somewhere else, going someplace new, right? Because as you explore a new city, if you live in a new town or new area, the best way to kind of learn that city is to just go out and walk around and just, make mistakes about where you're going, get lost a little bit and find your way back. I mean, that is kind of the best way to exercise your hippocampus, I would say.
Interesting. And from CSO Tyra, during your journey through school and your job, what is one of the biggest challenges you've ever faced, and what did you do to overcome it?
So one thing that was kind of tough for me specifically is I did graduate school studying animals, and it's not always easy to make the jump to humans. After you kind of have all this experience studying animals and learning about how that works, I really wanted to study humans, right? Because I was really, ultimately, it's great that we can study animals and learn about how our brain works at that really kind of detailed level. But ultimately, we want to know how it impacts us, right? We want to know how this kind of pertains to us. And so that was a tough jump. Like I said, my mentor here at UC Irvine was very positive about it. And I think, honestly, if he didn't give me that opportunity to try it and to try something a little bit different and to try humans, even if I didn't have any experience with them, that was probably the biggest hurdle that I had to jump through as far as my science career goes.
Absolutely. And once again, I want to say thank you so much for lending your time and expertise and for participating. Our final question would be, what advice would you give to us as young leaders for our future?
You know, I think this field, whether it's in science, whether it's in engineering or whatever you are, I think they really embrace kind of creativity and new ideas and things like that. And so I would say, you know, I mean, maybe it kind of sounds cliche, but I do think that you should kind of, you know, people want new ideas to solve the world's problems, right? And so I think you should be dreamers a little bit and, you know, pursue your interests. If you can find a way to make your interests also part of what you do for a job, it'll be much more fun.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, Eric. You are an inspiration to many of us, and we hope that you can participate in another one of these Human on Science calls. We have one more section of this call, and I was wondering, I'm going to leave that up to Miss Kelly, where we do this. Our motto is, as CSOs, we don't just hope it happens, we make it happen. And so what we're going to do in these upcoming moments is have Miss Kelly read it and say, CSOs, we don't just hope it happens, and then everyone else on the screen is going to say, we make it happen. And so I'm going to leave that open to her.
All right, so thanks again, Dr. Clemenson. It's so nice that you did like the first round and we've come so far. You noticed CSO Lauren did a great job facilitating the call. Your slides were incredible, so thank you. I know Miss Smith was able to join us, and I'm sure, you know, she'd love to have another opportunity.
Yeah.
So many of you have great ideas, so thank you for being a part of our network now.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'm happy to do it. It was great. It was a lot of fun.
All right, I'm sure they can ask more questions too. Maybe if we can figure out that CSO space for Torin to interact with other Minecraft individuals, that might be kind of fun.
Yeah.
So I'll work on that, right? So if everybody could go ahead and unmute and get ready.
Before that, can I ask a final question?
Not yet, hang on. All right, everybody, CSOs, don't just hope it happens.
Make it happen.
Thank you so much for joining us. Great job today, Lauren. Thank you, Dr. Clemenson. All right, CSO Mahar, go ahead and ask your final question.
Can you assist me with your Fortnite ID? We could play together.
Yeah. Should I put it in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
It's totally up to you. All right. Thank you all so much for being on the call today. It was wonderful to see so many of you from around the world. Again, Dr. Clemenson, thank you so much. And shout out to Claire for getting us connected. It's really been a pleasure. All right. Until next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Goodbye.